Previously on the fall of the Roman Republic. That was for you, Helena. I hope you enjoyed that. Luke, I don't even know if you got that reference, mate, but even if you did, I'm sure you hated it. But welcome back, guys. I want to give you an overview of the Battle of Actium because I wasn't there when you guys covered it in class, and I don't know how much work you actually did. Ignore my neighbor's cat who decides to come in and pretends that my apartment is her apartment. Okay. No, not on my bed. Jesus Christ, cat. Okay. Never mind. Okay, so anyway, okay, right. I'm sorry. This cat needs to go. Now that the cat has interrupted, I'm going to continue talking about kind of the context that led up to the battle, which is also, I guess, the breakdown of the Second Triumvirate. You guys should know that the Second Triumvirate was formed between Octavian over here and Antony, and of course Marcus Lepidus. And these three men had a legal kind of alliance, unlike the first one, which was kind of informal. And it was supported by the Roman Senate and was backed up by a legislation called the Lex Tidia, which is, yes, an interesting name, but essentially it was there to formally give all three men control of Rome and also give them different territories of the empire. Now, if you guys have a look, the two participated, or in particular, Marcus Antonius and Octavian participated in two major battles against Caesar's enemies, the liberators. The first one is in the Forum Gallorum, or called the Battle of the Forum Gallorum, which was against Decimus Brutus. And the Battle of Philippi is between these two men and Cassius and Brutus, which are the other two major kind of conspirators in the assassination who had at this point controlled a lot of the East. So the two men go into the East, and essentially Brutus is able to capture Octavian's kind of baggage train, and funny enough, as has happened before, Octavian is nowhere to be found, and I think it's Pliny who says, look, the guy was hiding in the marshes. But a lot of Octavian's kind of later sources justify this by saying, oh, he was given a dream that warned him of this impending danger, so he was able to escape. But nonetheless, Brutus attacks Octavian, is able to capture, Antony is able to capture Cassius's baggage train, and so it's almost like a split. But because of the raising dust, I guess Cassius thinks that Brutus is lost, and to defeat his own shame, he commits suicide. And later, when it's Octavian against Antony, Octavian and Antony against Brutus, Brutus also commits suicide when he realizes that there's nowhere to go. I love this image, by the way, how interesting. I'm just going to move it so you guys can see, but essentially it's a chocolate box from like the 1920s of a French company, and they have like little bits of history on the front, and I love that like kids were eating chocolate and it was like, oh, look, I know this scene. It's the scene of Brutus who commits suicide when he realizes the battle is lost. But essentially, what you guys should know is that the Triumvirate, with these two men and Lepidus, has two kind of terms, both for 5 years. And at the end of the 10-year period, it doesn't get renewed, which obviously tells us that the tension has developed to a point where both men are now ready to kind of try to be independent rulers in their own right. You guys should know that a lot of, in this time period, it is definitely Antony, which is like the kind of more superior senior member of the Triumvirate, although Octavian is slowly starting to build up, in particular when he is able to meet some of the administrative challenges in the West, which is kind of his sphere of influence. Basically, after the Battle of Philippi, things change slightly and the land gets redistributed in the empire. Antony is given the East. Octavian is given the West, and Lepidus is given pretty much nothing. The whole idea is that he is suspected of cooperating with Sextus Pompeius, who we're going to get to in a second, and so he is given Africa, but on the condition that he is proven not to be a conspirator with Sextus and therefore not defying Octavian. But Octavian kind of humiliates Lepidus and eventually is forced into kind of confronting him, and then his legions defect to Octavian, and then essentially 3 become 2. So let's go and talk about, I guess, Pompeius, because he's a really interesting story. Basically, after the Treaty of Brundisium, and we have kind of the reinsignation of the second 5-year period, Octavian gives his sister into marriage with Antony, and her name is obviously very easy to remember because it's Octavia. And the two actually marry and have children, and that kind of cements the second alliance, and kind of each go their own way. For a long time, I guess the two don't necessarily directly clash because they are busy with dealing with kind of problems that have been left behind in the last, since the assassination. So Octavian's in the east, trying to get all of the kind of provinces that were once controlled by Cassius and Brutus and kind of put them under the rule of, their legions, while Octavian is in the west dealing with the problem of like, okay, so we've just gone through this massive war. How are we going to, resettle our soldiers who essentially fought for us, yes, because they loved Caesar, and yes, to restore kind of his honor and all that, but essentially for land and territory and money. So he has to kind of deal with that problem. Exacerbating that problem is this guy over here, which is Sextus Pompeius. Now, Sextus has been basically a pirate around Sicily and has been controlling the region of kind of the lower west of Italy, in particular Sicily, which is a breadbasket of Rome. And he confronts Octavian by essentially creating a blockade that forces Italy to go hungry. Now, basically this is already like the straw that has the capacity to break the camel's back, because Octavian has been introducing prescriptions in Italy and eventually taxes to build up the money that he needs to finance his wars, both past and future. And so things are already a little bit kind of shady. In fact, a whole bunch of senators go and defect to Sextus in the hope of essentially securing some protection from this little runt Octavian, who's considered to be I don't know, at this point, I guess, bleeding Rome dry. It's usually the provinces that pay for these things, not Italians, and the Italians can even deal with the prescriptions because he's not the first one to do that. But taxes, that is considered a low blow. Anyway, so basically, Octavian is forced into this thing called the Pact of Messenium, which happens in 39, in which our friend Sextus over here decides that, well, initially he asks to be the one to replace Lepidus, as the third triumvirate, but the two deny him this, and essentially he gets this kind of consolation prize, which is officially getting Sardinia, Sicily. So these are the two territories, and the Peloponnese. So this is in Lower Italy, the islands that are kind of surrounding Italy and part of Italy, and the Peloponnese, which is a region in Greece. However, this kind of pact doesn't really last long. Interesting, by the way, these coins, which kind of show us the ambitions of Sextus. He presents himself as Poseidon, while this guy is presenting himself as Bacchus, the god of wine and fertility, and this guy as the divine Julius, the son of the divine Julius. So here he's kind of like a Poseidon figure. There's actually a trident on the top. There's this anchor at the bottom, and he's trying to build up a reputation within Sicily and kind of nationalizing his image. So he makes this pact, but the pact really doesn't last long. Octavian has an interest in kind of controlling this region and never kind of giving it up to Pompeius. And he eventually, with the help of Manus or Maneus, I forget, who is one of his admirals, is able to attack Sicily and basically bring it under control. Sextus is hugely critical of these two men. Basically, this guy in the Peloponnese, which because he's in the east, says, yeah, you can have this territory, but I'm going to collect all the revenue, all the taxes, which is then why do I even have it? While this kind of region is given by his admirals to Octavian, and Octavian with Lepidus go and challenge Sextus and eventually are victorious. When I say Octavian, what I really mean, and what I'll always mean when I talk about Octavian's military victory, is, of course, his right-hand man, Marcus Agrippa. He's the one that is victorious against Sextus, and then these territories get basically part of of Octavian's kind of regions that he controls. So now he's the sole ruler of the West, and one of his major problems are now, or major hurdles are now not there anymore. Interesting to also note that when Lepidus comes in and he actually helps Octavian win against Sextus, he kind of says, okay, maybe now this region should be mine. The Lex Titia actually says legally I should have, some of a territory. And Octavian uses this opportunity to be like, oh, Lepidus, you're overstepping, and basically declares war against Lepidus. But Lepidus's kind of legions defect to Octavian in a very humiliating way, and he is deposed. And while he retains his kind of role as Pontifex Maximus, he's essentially put into exile. So we have 3 becoming 2, officially becoming 2, and now one of the major issues for Octavian is no longer a threat. Antony has been, meanwhile, in the east. His efforts to continue the Parthian campaign, which is essentially kind of what Caesar intended to do until he was obviously cut short with the assassination, has been making some progress, but he's really had a few issues. So number one is his issue with kind of what was going on with Sextus, because Octavian demanded Antony's support, and so Antony had to begrudgingly go there. This is where we have that issue where he goes to meet Antony, but Octavian, but Octavian is late, and so Antony ends up going back to the east. But essentially, Octavian asks for the ships that Antony has in order to defeat Sextus, and Antony is kind of begrudgingly like, oh, okay, especially because with the support of his wife, he's able to, eventually come good, even though Octavian actually never returns the favor because he was expecting troops in return, but that never happens. So even though Antony does go into the east and does have some kind of wars, in particular in the buffer states that had been controlled by the Parthians, like Armenia, he doesn't have really the resources that he needs to fully launch a war into the east, and he hasn't been successful. And so at this point, he gets the aid of Cleopatra, who really does support him with resources, military resources. This is where things tend to go sour, and we have some brewing tensions between the two. I mean, let's be honest, the two were never really friends, and the entire time it was a really begrudging relationship. Both were very wary of the other, and both had no respect for the other. Lepidus favored Antony, but he had no respect from either of them. Antony always saw Octavian as kind of a young boy who had nothing to show for himself. He, held back the official adoption as long as he could. He was insulting Octavian. Octavian saw Antony as a brute who also was not worthy of respect, and the two really were, I guess, unfriendly in every opportunity that they could. But nonetheless, the biggest kind of blow was basically when Antony decided to go to Alexandria and live in a way that was, I guess, an open relationship with Cleopatra. And even though, Octavia goes to Antony with resources, he takes the resource, takes the men, but sends her away. And this is one of the major kind of pitfalls that Octavian uses to disgrace Antony, and this is kind of the biggest wedge that ends up growing between them, and this is part of the major propaganda campaign that Octavian uses against Antony. So yeah, there were always bring to tensions, of course, the fact that Lepidus is out and it becomes 2, that Cleopatra has now like come in and basically had two children with Antony and is kind of living in this open, elaborate relationship with him where she aims to not only be kind of encouraged to be seen as like the mistress, but you know, when he goes and presents himself in religious festivals, she's almost represented it as his wife. And then he actually does marry her, even though in the Roman eyes this marriage isn't legal. So Antony's complaining all the time. He complains that Octavian is taking too much power, that he